Some of us have been here. Some of us have been here chatting for 10 or 15 minutes, and probably some before that before I got here. We were just worried that you weren't here, but I'm glad to see you. Why don't we make it official and get started this morning? Welcome all. I see some faces I know that I haven't seen on this group before, which is nice, or some that haven't been for a while. And so happy Saturday, happy Thinking Square Dancing. And Tony, are you ready for me to make some introductions and get started, or do you need a moment more to collect your...
I think I'm as collected as I'm going to be.
Okay. Well, let me tell a little story about who this guy is that's going to be talking to us today.
Half the lies they tell about me are not true.
You never answered my question on email. What about the other half, Tony? Are the other half of the lies true or not?
I take the fifth.
It was probably a little over 40 years ago. One of the clubs I did lessons for, it was intro night, the first night of class, and we had, I don't totally remember, but a good number of squares, probably 4, 5, 6 squares. And I noticed one couple was, they seemed to be a little more comfortable, less nervous. They swung beautifully, etc. And about the third or fourth tip, I went over to them and I said, "You've danced before." And Tony said, "Well, I haven't danced much because I'm usually calling. I'm a caller." And I said, "What's your name?" And he told me. And I thought I pretty much knew all the callers in New England. And I didn't know this guy. And I was a little confused, but we somewhat hit it off. And as I recall, after the dance, we hung around for a little over an hour talking in the parking lot until a police car drove by and we got nervous. But he told me about a dance that he does every Monday in Concord, Massachusetts, and talked me into coming to that. And so I walked into this hall that I was unfamiliar with, except for the outside, because it was maybe 15 minutes from home versus the class being 30 minutes from home. And there were about 18 squares worth of people dancing with all sorts of energy, none of whom I knew. And I thought, ooh, this is interesting. And then I found out, ooh, this is fun. And then I used to go every Monday because it was really fun. And I still did my Western calling, but I did my traditional Contra and dancing. And then I realized that I wasn't the only caller who was unaware of this very similar, very parallel, but very different form of thing that's evolved from square dancing or square dance history. And I tried to inform other callers of it, and a few knew and a few understood and a few do both. I see some faces here that are in that category. But I thought it was time that maybe we should let people know about this again, because I'm sure there are many Western dancers. I think all the Western callers know what Contras are, and a few have even introduced them in their dances. And my feeling is introducing Contras in a Western dance is murder, is death on wheels. It really shouldn't be done, because Contra dances are more than just the choreography of Contras and traditional squares. They are the whole culture of the dress, the energy, the music, the people, the interaction of people, et cetera, all the things that Western dancers don't quite understand. All they understand is the choreography, and the choreography is not that challenging. So you take the worst of both groups and put them together, and it's not the thing to do. But going under the right circumstances, it's amazing. And I've spoken to, oh, and by the way, danced to lots and lots of different Contra callers, and Tony's still my favorite. And it's not just because he was my first. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to, all the way from Massachusetts, to Tony Parks, who is going to give you his side of the story. Go for it, Tony, and I'll try and be quiet for at least half an hour.
Thanks, Don. Okay. Yeah, there is another network. I've been calling for over 50 years. I've called in 36 states in Canada and 5 countries in Europe. I've recorded on several labels and written and published 3 books. And some of you have probably never heard of me. You know, I see a few friends and acquaintances out there, but it's possible to go for 50 years and hardly be aware that there's another network. And I know that there are callers in my network who would, if somebody mentioned a prominent modern Western caller, they'd probably say, oh yeah, I know who that is, even though I've never met him. But a lot of them wouldn't. A lot of them are just vaguely aware that there is a modern square dance scene. So here's a little bit about my network, the one I've spent most of my time in.
Before you get into that, there's another part of my introduction I wanted to say, and I really am terrible. Sorry of interrupting here, but Tony is one of those people in the other network that understands ours. When I met him, I think he knew some mainstream dancing. At one point, he and his wife were going to the national convention and decided they should be able to dance while they were down there, not only just introduce Contras. And I had the privilege of teaching him and Beth how to do plus at the Tech Squares 15 course crash course. So Tony understands our side of the picture too. So he's not just coming from a different place. He's one of those people that understands both. Sorry about that, Tony, but I thought
no, that's a good point, Don. That's a good point. I have been on the periphery of the modern square dance scene since I was a kid. In the 1960s, as a teenager, I danced with a club on Long Island, the Swingin' Teens, and that was before Collar Lab. So that was before the names Mainstream and Plus and Advanced. It was class level and club level. And the caller introduced whatever new moves he felt like introducing. There was no governing body. But as I've said in some other presentations, in the 1960s, it was possible for someone with a solid grounding in traditional square dancing to walk into a club without having taken the lessons and get by. When I danced, there was also a club in New York City where I lived. I'm not sure it had a name. It must have. Anyway, it met at the YMCA, and I danced there and with Swingin' Teens. And as I remember, the only moves that we did that were not common to traditional squares were square through and star through at that point. Anything else was new to everybody, and the caller would walk it through. So I had square dancing in grade school. I'd had it at summer camp, traditional square dancing. And so not only could I get by without lessons, but often I was the one in the square who would sort things out if the square broke down. I would kind of just gently nudge people to get where they were supposed to be. Okay, about our network. It doesn't really have a name that everybody agrees on, although I suppose these days it's Contra, because we do mostly Contras in this network now. Squares are not as fashionable as they were 30, 40 years ago in our scene. But first, I want to say that we all, you and I and my friends, we all have a lot in common. We want our dancers to succeed. At least I hope we do. And our job is to keep our dancers happy by their definition of happy. Otherwise we're out of a job. That's what we need to do. So we need to find the dancers who want what we have to offer. We want to find the dancers whose idea of a good time is similar to our idea of a good time. Okay, the current scene, and this is what I call the traditional revival scene, as opposed to pockets of dances around the US and Canada that have survived all this time as traditional, and we can get into that later. But this is the folk revival or traditional revival scene that's populated mostly by, I would say, kind of intellectuals, people who take advantage of modern communication and transportation and go to each other's dances. And so that there is, even though there's no governing body along the lines of Collar Lab, there's a kind of consensus among the callers, and the callers get to know each other, and a lot of dancers go to week-long and weekend camps and institutes. So there is a kind of a subculture that goes beyond the local dance. Okay, some of the things that distinguish us. Live music. We always use live music, except at one or two institutes where the daytime sessions are done with recordings. And that tends to be a very rare thing. I do one camp that's mostly international folk dance, where the other daytime sessions use recorded music. So I use recorded music. But in general, if you go to a series dance, a dance that happens every week or every month or twice a month, you're always going to find live music. Another distinguishing mark is that everybody is welcome. There are maybe 3 or 4 series around the country that are for experienced contra dancers only, but that's very rare. Your typical contra series is all welcome. There are no lessons. There are no lessons even offered, except for some series have a lesson before the dance each time that is 15 or 30 minutes of just making sure people are comfortable, getting them to move to music, showing them maybe half a dozen basics, and then letting them assimilate into the group for the rest of the evening. And that's possible because we almost always walk through each dance before we do it. And the walkthrough tends to be short because 80% of the people in any given evening have been doing it for a while. Very much like the old days, like the late 1800s, early 1900s, when the way you learned square dancing was to be couple 4 in a square and just get dragged through. That's kind of the way it works now, and it seems to work pretty well. Singles are always welcome. There's no preference shown to singles or couples. Admission is always per person rather than per couple. There's no dress code, come as you are. I like to dress up a little bit. A lot of people dress down. They bring like 3 or 4 t-shirts and they change in front of everybody when they get a little moist. There's very little hash, very little improvising on the caller's part, although they will do a medley of a few times through one dance, and then they'll switch right on the fly into another dance. But that's still considered kind of a novelty. The satisfaction comes not from mastering choreography that you didn't know was coming. The satisfaction comes from dancing to the beat and to the phrase of the music. And the fact that so much of it is predictable, that the choreography, they know what's coming because it repeats, and the music is predictable, the musical structure is predictable. You know that the dance is going to begin and end. Each part of the dance is going to begin and end with its part of the tune. And because of that, the predictability means, number one, you can put in flourishes, sort of like swing dance moves, and you know how much time you have to do them. And number two, it means you can be on time for the kind of moves where it's really, really important that everybody hits it at the same time, like a balance or a long lines forward and back. This is true in the squares that we do too. I have seen modern Western callers who had their grounding in traditional squares 50, 60, 70 years ago. I've seen them almost in tears, seeing a floor of 100 or 200 dancers all doing an Alamo style at the same time, or a grand square. They said they thought they'd never see anything like that again. We use a limited number of basics, as you probably know. The callers, by and large, instead of writing new basics. They look for new ways to combine the old ones. They do invent new ones from time to time, but because we walk through just about every dance before we do it, that levels the playing field. So it's not as much of a problem as it was, say, in modern squares in the 1960s, what I was talking about before, where you literally didn't know what the caller was going to do, and you might not have learned it in class either. There's no governing body, as I said. There's just a consensus among the callers who get to know each other. The closest thing that we have to a governing body is something called the Country Dance and Song Society, but it's mostly a channel of communication. It doesn't dictate which calls we're going to use, and it doesn't write definitions of the calls. That's left to consensus. And the definitions that we use of the moves don't always match the Caller Lab definitions, even if we use the same name for something. Some of them actually predate Caller Lab by a number of years. For instance, our definition of cast and a couple of others, we mean something slightly different. Okay, with that said, I want to give you because it's so much more fun to see it and hear it in action than it is to hear somebody talk about it. I want to give you some videos that give you an idea of the kind of energy connected with this scene. Don, did you want to say something before I started the video?
No, go for it. I'm sorry.
So the only thing I was piping in to say was when you go to share a screen, there is a share computer sound checkbox. Make sure you get that checked as you share the screen.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Because otherwise we will hear nothing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, if you can't hear me, raise your hand. Okay, can you still hear me?
Can hear your voice.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Dave, my concern was more about making sure that we could hear the music with the sound when you get there, or hear the, you know what I mean.
Okay.
I just realized that all these callers are mine. That's great.
Okay. The first one is of a contra dance at the Concord Scout House, just west of Boston in Massachusetts. There is dancing twice a week to live music, every Monday night, every Thursday night. This is a hot band, mostly from Quebec, called Tidal Wave. Okay, Dan, did that work okay?
That worked wonderfully, yeah.
I think there was a very slight lag in the music, in the dancing. We could see a little jitter of it, so that I want those people watching to know that it really is slightly smoother than what you see.
It looked okay from this end.
I also have a can't remember the word, a question for everybody that I don't want an answer for. But when's the last time you've had that many people dancing to you? Didn't that look great?
Not for a year anyway.
Well, that's true, but it's probably not for 10 or 15 years for most of us.
Oh, it's too bad.
Yes.
Okay, that was a regular weekly dance. Here is an annual event, the New England Folk Festival, which is generally the same weekend as the New England Square and Round Dance Convention, or one weekend apart. It just works out that way, that that's when the school is available to us. We're not trying to conflict. But this has been going since, I think, 1944. So longer than I've been around, longer than most of us have been around, I'll bet. And this is sort of the de facto national convention for contra dancers. This is one of the dozens of hour-long contra sessions at the New England Folk Festival. Okay, that one, these all go on for several minutes. An average contra dance is about 15 times through the tune, or about 8 minutes, but that should give you an idea. The band there was a group that gets together once a year at the festival. They call themselves Not Enough Fiddles. And as you can see, it's multi-generational, just as the dancers are. Okay, here's another clip from the New England Folk Festival. This one was done by a professional photographer, and so you can see it from several angles. I think this one, the video itself, is particularly well done. This is a prominent contra caller, Lisa Greenleaf, who also has dabbled in modern Western squares. Okay, that's enough for now. I've got some more just to prove that we do squares occasionally. But at this point, let's see. I'd be willing to throw it open to questions if there are any. So we have a couple of things on the chat that I haven't looked at.
So I was just going to note that I went through and muted a bunch of people from whom I was hearing extraneous sounds. There's nothing personal about that. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask questions or chat. And I also wanted to comment two things. It's not just the number of dancers on the floor, Don. It's also the age range and the fact that there's a wide mix of ages in there. And I don't know what they were recording the sound off, especially in that last one. But when was the last time you heard sound that good at a modern Western dance?
Oh, I've got a bunch of comments. I'm taking MC privilege here going first, but at least I had a bunch of comments. Now I can't remember. Tony mentioned NEFA being the national convention-ish type of thing. I've been to several of them. As Tony said, they frequently overlapped with the New England Convention. I think it may have had something to do with the month of April having 4 or 5 Sundays kind of thing. But whenever it wasn't on the same weekend as the National Convention, I would go to NEFA and get totally worn out in a wonderful way. One of the things when I first started was I asked about styling kind of things. I said, how do you hold your hands in a promenade, in front and back, skater's position? And people said, doesn't matter, any way you want, which I thought was great. I did find out though, that pretty much everybody conformed to the same method eventually, but if you didn't care. And the same with dress. You didn't have any kind of specific dress, but if you looked around, people tended to have similar styles of dress. There are a lot of things that just work out because it's fun to do it. But the main thing is, I think I mentioned earlier, is that it's fun. It's dancing with the music. Oh, the other thing I want to say is Western dancing seems to have focus on the caller, and the music is in the background, hopefully to supplement the caller. With my feeling with some of the modern music, it just sort of interferes with the caller. It took me probably 3 big contra dances before I could relax enough with constantly changing partners and changing people and getting used to that whole thing, that I could start to concentrate on the music and realizing that the emphasis was on the music, not the caller. And it was really good stuff, good musicians, what have you. And still, if I hear some kind of music like that in the background, my feet start moving, and my mind does. There's
in general, dancers, contra dancers, when they are deciding whether to go to an evening or whether to go to a camp, especially with a regular evening, a series dance, they look at the band name more than they look at the caller name, because bands do get a reputation for being hot or playing a certain style of music. There are several regional traditional styles of music that bands specialize in, and any one of them can be used for contra dancing. That last clip that you saw was a band playing old time string band style. And the one before that was playing pretty straight New England style, which is based on Scottish and Irish music. And then the band from Quebec, it was Quebecois music is based on Irish music, but they give it a whole different twist. And that's how we get the variety in the music, rather than using pop and rock and country and whatever. These are all slight variations on the old time tunes, just with a band's or a group of bands' different spin on them.
I also, as I say, the purpose, my thoughts on this is to make some people that are not aware of this parallel universe aware of it. But we do have many prominent Western callers that wear a different hat and do fit in beautifully with the other group. And we have several of them here. Clark Baker is known for his Western end choreography, and he's a very avid contra dancer. Andy Shore, Chris Jensen. Not with us is, great seeing you again, Andy. Not with us, but avid contra dancers are Vic and Debbie Cedar.
Betsy
Gata, I forgot Betsy, definitely. And some just avid dancers, some quite accomplished callers also. And it'd be interesting eventually, after some of the people that this is new to hear some of their comments about how they justify doing the two things. For me, and I'll try to shut up now, but Western is mentally challenging and rewarding. Contra is physically and emotionally challenging and rewarding. Emotionally, because there's a different interaction of people, and you dance with, if I go with Gail, we'll dance the first and last together and then find old friends or make new friends dancing other sets with each other.
I forgot to mention that as a distinguishing mark of our network, that it's customary to do each number with a different person, a different partner.
And as you go up and down the contra line, you find somebody that you've seen 2 or 3 times and dances well. So in the passing 16 beats, you ask them if you can dance the next set with them, and you make new friends that way. For me, as a regular contra dancer and regular Western caller, I got the best of both worlds. I got the mental challenge while calling and the emotional and physical challenge while dancing. But that was just my take on it back 25 years ago when I was still actively doing stuff. With that, I'll shut up. Tony, go ahead, look for questions. Mel's got his.
I did see John ask a little more
I
about.
did, yeah. More calling, less music.
Okay. Okay, I will play some of Squares now, where you'll be able to hear the calls more prominently. Sometimes people who record the contra videos are more interested in the music than they are in the calls, so they will put the microphone closer to the band than to the house speakers where the calls are coming through. Okay. So I've got some clips of Squares now. I think they're all of myself, actually, but this is partly to prove that we do Squares on occasion. These Squares, the first couple of Squares here are what, okay, let me see where we are. Help. Okay, my IT person is working on this. The first couple of Squares here are what I call transitional squares. That is, they're basically traditional or slight variations on traditional squares that were popular in the early days of club square dancing. And I say club square dancing advisedly rather than modern Western or Western, because I don't know if you know square dance history, but when the club movement started, the first thing that happened was that people organized into clubs and with a dress code and admission usually by couples, and you had to take lessons and all that. But the choreography was very traditional. So what people were doing in their clubs, in their costumes, was not what we now think of as modern square dancing. It was traditional square dancing. So here's a couple of numbers.
Ladies change across the track, keep turning till you face
one was usually called the route, although it had other names, and it became very popular in the late 1940s and through the 1950s. Here's one that a great California caller, Ed Gilmore, made popular. It's called the Lazy H, and it's a variation on a traditional Western dance.
While you're watching this, guys, watch.
All get set for the triple element. Do an element that four ladies start. It's one by outside the bar. Do an element that four gentlemen start. Ladies walk, but not too far. And element left in your left hand. Right to your honey, go right, left, right. Perfect right, and a perfect wrong. And a double step, go right along. Promenade with your partner home. When you take a little walk, go round your up. Animal number one, down center, split the ring. Go round and squat. To a line of four, go forward, four to the middle, four, fall back, forward again, there, stay back to the side, goes to a right and left through, down the middle, then you turn to, turn right around and right and back, right and back, the same old drag, line of four, you fall back, arch in the middle of the end, start through, separate, go around, listen to, between side, couple, stay, go forward, six and back, and couple, three, go down the middle and separate, go around just one, two lines of four, go forward, eight to the middle, left back, down the center, two to the right, left through, they turn into mix, come again and pass through, and left corner, no swing to partner, right this way, should be home, couple two, down the center, split the ring, go.
And that was from the early to mid 1950s when that dance was first introduced. I think the next couple,
The recording wasn't.
yeah, those last two were from 1992. That was about the peak of my time with the house band Yankee Ingenuity that I co-founded. And that was, we had the Monday night dance. I called there from 1978 to 1997. And that dance, the Monday night dance, is still going with a rotation of callers. The calls are a little clearer on the next couple of clips. The next one is from a dance with a big band that has winds in it called Elixir. This was a party in, I think, 2010 to honor the veteran caller Ralph Sweet, and it was a launch party for his book of singing squares. This is not a singing square. This is a Ted Sanella dance.
Out your partner, out your corner, all join hands, circle to the right. Circle left, go the other way. Face your partner and balance down, bounce and swing. Everybody swing and everybody dance. On the corner, element left, element right, your partner. Element left, your corner. Right hand to your partner, grand.
That should give you some idea of the kind of energy that it happens more often than not, I'd say, even though the band isn't always that big.
Or that good. Oh, I was so admiring the way that they backed up when you needed to be heard, and they came in knowing what was going with the figures. You know,
Yeah,
you
they
know.
waited until they saw the dancers knew what was coming.
So Andy asks you to say something about the movement from traditional contra to zesty.
Okay, we're getting into dance history now. Eventually, Don willing, I want to do a whole session on history because it's a long and complex and to me fascinating subject. But okay, Contra dancing, Contra dances, the things that we dance, pretty much died out in most of the US and Canada, except for New England and a couple of pockets in the maritime provinces and Ohio and New Jersey that I know of anyway, but they were pretty much a New England thing from about 1900 or the late 1800s on. Squares took over, and then couple dances even pushed out the squares in most parts of the country. So contra dancing was kind of dormant until about 1940, when the city people in New York and Boston found out about them, and international folk dancers found out about them. So there was a small but dedicated group of dancers from about 1940 to 1970 who were doing the traditional contra dances. And they were sort of like some of the traditional squares that you may know of, the visiting couple squares where some people were moving and some people were standing and waiting. A lot of the older contra dances are like that. And then roughly 1970 is when contra dancing had its biggest revival since, you know, the 100 or more years earlier. And that's when people started writing contra dances that kept everybody active all the time, and that seems to be the norm now. Andy, did you want to say something more?
No, I just wanted to get a sense of why that's different. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Can people hear me? Okay.
Yes.
For me, so let me just get a little side story. I started off in the modern Western world, and I remember when I went to my first color school, they did about 5 minutes on Contra, where they put on a record, and it was a very stately, unequal dance where half the people weren't moving most of the time. And in my puzzle solver brain, I was like, who could ever be interested in this? Because it was really nothing appealing to it to me. So Contra went sort of, you know, had no appeal to me whatsoever for a long time. And then in, I think it was 2005, the Color Lab convention was in Louisville, and Chris was there, and I think Don was there, and I know that Clark Baker was there. And that Sunday night happened to be the local Contra dance in Louisville. So about 20 of us modern Western callers went to this dance, and the rest, as they say, is history. The light came on in my head. I understood what was appealing about live music and a more zesty approach to Contra, which is what the caller was doing there. And that's what really sparked an interest in me that has pretty much turned me from a modern Western caller to a Contra caller in that time. Was the idea that you didn't have to satisfy the puzzle part of your brain, that instead it was the music and the flowy and the social interaction parts of your brain that were more appealed to by a Contra dance setting than by a modern Western setting.
Yeah, in the past, we've had some callers who were solidly in the modern Western camp who decided that that wasn't what satisfied them, and they moved over. Ralph Sweet, Chip Hendrickson, Don Armstrong, actually, if you go back to the 50s, and one or two others that I know about, who went either completely or almost completely over to the traditional side.
So, silly question: was Chip Hendrickson from Newtown, Connecticut?
Yes. Well, when I first when you first notice him in the old Square Dance magazines, he was from Long Island, but I don't know if he was originally from Connecticut, but he moved to Connecticut, and that's where he was when I knew him.
I went to high school with his son, which is just putting pieces together now. So.
Tony mentioned some people like Don Armstrong who went over. It's interesting to me that in the early years, I'll put this up.
Oh yeah.
Contras are fun. This is Al Brundage in 1952. So, you know, Al at that point was spearheading the modern Western movement in New England. Playing a prominent role as well as traveling elsewhere and publishing a book with Reuben Merchant on Contras. So there were efforts to keep Contras in the new modern movement, but mostly that didn't seem to stick.
I've got a question as to where did the term zesty come from? I know Clark uses that at his Caller Lab Monday night after sessions. Andy just used that. But I'm just wondering, is that an official term or is that a Clark term? Or
well, that's a term like if you know, those of you who remember before Caller Lab, the word advanced with a small a, nobody really could define it as far as I know. It, you know, before it became an official Caller Lab program. The word zesty is like that. Larry Jennings, who was a prominent dance organizer and sometime caller in the Boston area, he started a series, the NEFA Contra series, sponsored by NEFA, the New England Folk Festival Association, back in the 70s, I guess it was. And his goals were to feature the musicians more prominently and to provide a place for people who wanted to work on getting it right, as opposed to just coming and socializing. He had a vision for a kind of contra dancing that was strongly connected and where everybody was in exactly the right place at the right time, because that was how he got his satisfaction. And what zesty has come to mean in the minds of other people is not always the same as what Larry had in mind. You know, Larry, he didn't want to over intellectualize it either. I mean, he did a lot of that himself. He was an engineer, and he did a lot of that when he was analyzing dances. But he knew that when you go to a dance and actually dance to music, the satisfaction comes from being in the right place at the right time and being right with the music and with the other dancers. But what a lot of people seem to mean by zesty now is either everybody moving all the time, which is definitely a criterion for modern contra dancing, but it's not necessarily what Larry meant by zesty. Larry promoted a lot of dance numbers that had some people standing some of the time. The other thing people seem to mean by zesty now is sort of exclusive, sort of experienced dancers only. In one city, there was a series called Zesty Contras that was almost a closed club in terms of they wanted you to know what you were doing before you even tried to dance with them. So zesty has meant different things to different people. I don't think I've heard it used before now to refer to the whole modern contra phenomenon in general. It originally meant physically and intellectually satisfying in the sense that we're all doing it together.
I want to ask a question of those people. We've talked a bit about the people that do Western and Contras, but I'm assuming that some of you out there, that I'm accomplishing what I tried to with this, is to make you aware of this wonderful parallel system that you weren't unaware of before. And I'm just curious what your thoughts on seeing this, if we could hear from some of you that we haven't heard from.
Well, I've never seen this before. You've talked about it a lot in these meetings, and I haven't really known what it is. I think that I have a question actually. What do you think makes it more popular than our square dancing? The people are younger, there are more people. What do you think it is that makes this happen? And I think maybe in Sweden, where I come from, we have the system where you don't dance. Well, many people come single, but even if you come with a couple, you do exactly as you described, Don. You maybe dance the first one with your partner and maybe the last one, but you're expected, or a lot of people change partners for every tip. So I think maybe we have a little bit of that, but I'm really interested in your thoughts about why people contra dance if they don't want to square dance.
I think some of it has less to do with the type of dance than just that these things, that fashion goes in waves. That in the 1950, to give you a round number, in the few years surrounding the year 1950, square dancing was a national craze, a national fad in the United States. And of course, at that time, the choreography was all traditional, but you had people forming clubs to do it and dressing up and taking lessons. And you also had a lot of people doing a more casual variety, sort of like what we do now in the Contra scene. And it was something that everybody did. It was, people didn't laugh at you for going square dancing, except unless, school kids would laugh at their classmates who were interested. But adults, by and large, they knew what square dancing was because it was in all the media. It was in the movies, it was on TV, it was in the newspapers and magazines. And so it was something that people knew about, even if they didn't do it themselves, and there was a lot of interest in it. And the fact that, the fact that square dancing was popular at that time, a lot of it was that you had people coming home from the Second World War, starting families. That was when you got the baby boom, the children of the people who came home from the war. You had people getting married and looking for recreation. They had more leisure time than they had ever had before, and square dancing seemed to fit the bill. With Contra dancing, it started in the mid 1960s with the back to the land young people, the counterculture, the people who were looking for something other than what their parents had done. And it just happened to be the right recreation at the right time. I started dancing in earnest, both squares and contras, at a summer camp called the Farm and Wilderness Camps in Vermont. It's Quaker run, and the emphasis is on self-reliance, on making your own whatever. You make your own buildings, you grow your own food, and you make your own fun. And so square dancing and contra dancing and playing the music for the dancing is one of the activities at the camp. And when I was there in the 60s, that was, as I say, the time when a lot of young people around the country were looking for something fun to do in between growing their own food and making their own way in the world. And so some of it is just the way fashion works, that certain things are fashionable just because. And to talk about the other aspect of it, whether there's anything intrinsic in modern square dancing or modern contra dancing to make one more popular than the other, I think we would have to get into dance history overall, which I think is a topic for a whole nother session. because I would have to talk about some of the things that I think went wrong in modern square dancing, and I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. There are certain kind of catch-22s or vicious cycles that have cropped up, like when, in so many places. There's no place for people to dance between class level and plus. And there's this feeling that you're not really square dancing until you learn plus. And so people who want to do it less frequently, who don't want it to be an all-consuming part of their lives, in a lot of regions, they have nowhere to go. I understand that in some parts of the world it's different. I don't know if this is still true in Australia, but I've heard that you're not supposed to join a club and dance at club level until you've been dancing for a year in class and then another year at basic or mainstream. And that sounds like a more workable system if you can keep people satisfied for 2 years. And every so often, and this is again getting into square dance history, every so often somebody comes along and tries to create a new level of square dancing that's not one-nighter level, but it's not mainstream either. It's somewhere in between, and it gives people a place to dance and have fun without having to learn a whole new bunch of stuff. And usually what happens is they end up reinventing traditional square dancing in terms of the choreography. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a great idea, but what usually happens is they can't get enough people to stick with it for a long enough time to make it a going concern. And it's almost impossible to get any existing plus dancers or their callers to go along with the program and to help promote it, because what they're looking to do is to replace the plus dancers that they're losing through natural attrition. So I think the answer is it's complicated.
I'm gonna, Mel, we'll get to you in a minute. I know you've been waving an awful lot. I've noticed that the big hand is past the 12, so I'm going to do the official ending like we usually do and open it to the best part of the conversation, which usually continues after this. But Dan, again, thank you for the engineering behind this and watching the chat and the welcoming people in. Thank all of you for coming. I see some people that haven't been in on our Saturday sessions and hope you will join us for some others. We will not be having one for the next 2 weeks because of holiday weekends like Christmas and New Year's. We will be going again in January. I really, really, really want to thank Tony for being willing to sit in with us. Yeah, that's the appropriate thing. And share his knowledge and help open a door for many of us. Tony, we definitely are gonna try and get you in for a history of square dancing that will, as you say, probably take up another full session, probably towards the end of January. I want to thank your IT department. Beth, I saw your shoulder on occasion. Beth is a very good Contra dance caller in her own right. And has been through plus lessons at Tech Squares, so has a feel for where some of you are coming from. I think it was a great session and look forward to continue. If because we won't be meeting the best of the holiday season, however you celebrate it. And one of my other groups, I said, at least we all celebrate New Year's the same way. And then I remembered the Jewish New Year and the Chinese New Year. But so the best of the holiday season to all of you. We are officially done. You don't have to feel embarrassed or make excuses if you leave. If you haven't been with us before, thank you very much for coming. Hope you've enjoyed it. And let the conversation begin. Let's start.
Thank you, Don. The pleasure is mine. Traditional callers, just like modern callers, love to talk shop. So it's no burden.
Thanks again, Tony. That was great.
Thanks to Dan.
Mel, Throw in your 3 cents worth. Let's hear from Australia.
Tony, absolutely brilliant. I love the presentation, and thank you very much for bringing it out again. I haven't done Contra since the 90s. That's mainly because the venue's not there, and that was when I was in Canada. It was quite popular at the folk festivals. It was quite popular in the Quebec side, not so much in Ontario. But one of the things that I noticed about it was the phrasing. It's all 4-beat, 8-beat phrasing. It's all high energy, but I've going through your videos, and I don't know why, but I started counting the beats per minute. Everything's at 120 beats per minute, which most square dancers say is very slow, but it's very high energy, it's very high impact, and it's very active, which is one of the fun things about it.
Yeah, it's bouncier.
Sorry?
It's bouncier.
It is.
You can bounce a little at 120, and it's harder at 130.
Yeah, but it also allows everybody to move to the music, move comfortably to the music. And one of the things that I noticed in there, like watching the sessions, there are, people make mistakes, but as Daryl said earlier, it says some of the best things from Contras we lost in square dancing, and that is like the focus is on the music. You can't help to move with the music. You've got the fun and the social aspect of the mixing. You've got the repetition, that fun, that music, that mixing is what makes a success, and it allows you to make mistakes, whereas the modern square dancing jigsaw puzzle doesn't really allow for mistakes because of a lack of repetition. It's that constant bang, bang, bang. You're onto something completely different, the jigsaw puzzle. And my final comment was, one of the things that was a problem for me, and it still seems to exist, and I think Andy Shore started saying something along this line as well. Contra is presented today to square dancing and to square dance callers the same way that square dancing was presented to kids in school, usually by a teacher that doesn't dance, that has a record, that took something at their school. I'm learning how to teach English, but you got to learn how to do PE, and that's what they teach the kids. That's what they give a bad taste of square dancing.
And it's supposed to be good for you.
Yeah, Contra by contrast, when I went to school, Contra was presented by somebody that actually came in that did Contra, and it was absolute blast. The school kids loved it. Square dancing was presented in elementary school as, you may as well all become goth and seal yourself in your own coffin, because that's what everybody wanted to do. That's what square dancing, that was the impression it was given. It's the big controversy because Contra is presented to square dancing and square dance callers as square dancing was presented to elementary school kids, and it's so absolutely wrong. It's a fantastic activity, and I want to say thanks again for bringing it up, and I look forward to the next presentation.
Thank you. I was lucky. A lot of kids had square dancing in phys ed, and with somebody who didn't particularly like it himself, and they ended up hating it. It was more of a drill than anything else. I was lucky in that in my grade school, square dancing was part of the music program rather than phys ed, and the music teacher called from the piano as she played for the dancing. She also put on some called records. This was the 1950s, and she used some of the popular called records of the time. I remember Bob Osgood calling Make an Arch and Ed Gilmore calling Grand Square. Big callers that you've heard of if you know your modern square dance history. So we had a little of both. We had what was currently the popular stuff, and we had some older traditional material. Where I really got hooked on square dancing and later Contras was at summer camp, where we had a live band made up of camp counselors, and the caller was a counselor. It was fun to have somebody you knew up there because you could heckle him. And the band varied from one summer to the next, depending on who was there and what instruments they played. But we had up to 10 people on stage. We had up to a 10-piece band. We had a head coach who had played a mean set of drums. And some years it was kind of a Dixieland sound, especially for the singing calls like Alabama Jubilee. And we did a lot of what was popular just a few years earlier in the 1950s. Before the modern choreography really gelled, when people in square dance clubs were doing, as I said, mainly traditional material. So that's what I fell in love with, and that's what has stuck with me all these years. That and international folk dancing. I love an evening that has a little bit of both.
Daryl, you've been waving your hand for a while.
Okay. I just wanted to say, Tony, excellent, very, very nice presentation and bringing back some very, very fond memories. Now, I've never been involved in Contras myself, but I've always been really enamored by them. I think nothing but the best. Some of the things you said, particularly about where people were after that Second World War, coming back into it. Maybe going to draw a bit of a correlation between coming out of a pandemic, house arrest here for everybody. That would be worth giving some thought to. That along with the basic lower level that's consistent. Maybe this SSD programming is going to help us out. The combination of the two, if we can start working in that direction for a restart.
Yeah.
But we need to, I think, change the mental aims from a college standpoint. I think that's going to, Tony, I would love to be able to sit and talk with you for about 3 or 4 hours and just pick your brain. The correlation between the two activities is too close not to be able to see some things in there that would be very, very beneficial. But that,
as I said, Daryl, you know, we have a lot in common. We want people to have fun, and we have to listen to them and find out what they want.
I did say in chat down there that I really, really feel that a lot of the things that we've changed within the modern Western square dance still exist in the Contra. And a lot of those things we've done away with are what we're missing in our modern Western dance. And that's, like you say, that might be a whole session all by itself. But if we could get back to some of the actual dancing and away from a bit of the choreographic puzzle solving and get something in between, I think we'd be a lot better off. We can have both. Like I said, I better shut up. I have a way of running off. But thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Speaking of running off, here I am again. Tony, you think I should mention my skiing analogy?
Go ahead.
When I try to explain Contras to Western dancers that haven't been introduced to it before, the best analogy I've come up with in my mind is skiing. People used to ski. They'd walk up and downhill ski afterwards, or their cross-country ski, you know, go across level areas. And at some point or another, people developed better bindings and ski lifts, and downhill skiing became a thing. And I picture that, but some people liked to go with the cross-country skiing and none of this modern stuff. And I picture that like the Western dancers getting the lifts and the downhill equipment, and the traditionalists getting the cross-country skiing. And the traditionalist cross-country skiing evolved also in a more traditional way with better equipment for that, as did the downhillers. And some people are strictly traditional or cross-country skiers, some are downhill, and some are smart enough to enjoy both. And they've both evolved with the same roots, the same bases, just like Contras and traditional squares versus modern Western. That's the best analogy I've been able to come up with before so far.
It works for me.
I do want to pick on one person that is here with us, but I talk about introducing people to Contras that haven't had it before. I took a good friend of mine to a Contra dance, took him and his wife once, telling them, these were C4 dancers and callers, and telling them how they really ought to be aware of this. And they said, yeah, it was interesting, but had no interest whatsoever. I noticed you unmuted yourself, Clark. You're getting ready to talk. Good. And years later, have still involved with Western and Challenge, but have located and found the fun part of Contras and gotten heavily involved in that also. I'm talking about Clark Baker, who's presented a few times for us here before. And I asked Clark, why didn't you like it the first time? What happened later? And so I'm saying this because some of you that might get interested and go and not enjoy it might have the same experience as Clark. And Clark said, I wasn't ready for it back then. Now I am. But in your words, Clark, what do you got to say for yourself?
Well, I don't remember well going to the Scout House that first time. I kind of remember I was bored. It was the same thing over and over. And as you say, at that time, I was climbing the modern Western levels. So I was probably a C4 dancer. And it wasn't what I needed at the time. I was looking for puzzle solving. Whereas that wasn't what I was getting. I also wasn't necessarily a good, quote, dancer in terms of hearing the music, moving with the music, etc. When I first started dancing, I probably could barely take one step for every beat of music. And certainly when I started calling, I couldn't call with the music, even with the beat of the music. So let's say I'm musically challenged. So that first experience wasn't fun, and it wasn't that I didn't know what I was doing, but it just didn't do it for me. Later, when I was getting bored with C4 and looking for something else, Miriam and I went back to the Scout House, and we enjoyed it. And we didn't understand everything that was happening, but we understood most of it. And our mistakes were interesting because there were parts that a beginner normally would fumble on that we were good at. And there were parts that beginners might be good at that we would fumble on. And I don't think people understood where we were coming from. So we felt like imposters for the first couple of weeks we attended. But then after that, we just kept going and it went from there. And I certainly enjoy NEFA. It was good to see Ernie Spence in one of your videos and some other people I know. I had a couple other comments. In your first square, there was some courtesy ladies' chains across the line, down the line, etc. I think you said that was the route.
Yeah.
Right. And even though that dance was very simple and used moves that we use in modern Western square dancing, you couldn't call the similar effect of that dance in modern Western, using modern Western terminology, because of how precisely we've defined all the calls. There's nothing that would let you ladies chain, but then do that courtesy turn a little more or a little less to get the lines going from across the hall to, you know, down the hall, etc.
Couldn't you say ladies chain, keep turning, and then face the other way?
It wouldn't work. It wouldn't come out, and the dancers wouldn't respond to it in real time, having never seen it before.
Yeah, that
And
reminds
some
me
of them have to
a
turn a little
story.
more and some have to turn a little less. So
Yeah.
So it's interesting that clever dance, we just don't have the terminology, even though we have ladies chain and a whole bunch of other terminology, even at challenge.
Yeah, you could do it with bend the line, but it wouldn't be smooth. You have to come to a stop and then bend the line and then chain the other way. Plain English is a problem, you know, when you have to supplement a call that people know with plain English. I'll let you finish your thoughts, whatever they were, and then I have a couple of stories that reminds me of.
Okay. Last week, I didn't speak, but I made a comment to people. And one of the comments was that David Millstone would like all of us to document, especially in video and audio recordings, our current dance scene. And I note today that at least on my screen, David Millstone is over on my far right, down one picture, but I'm sure he's somewhere else on yours. So for me, he's right over there. So wave.
He's right over your head.
Yeah, it's different on everything. So that's the David Millstone I was talking about. Another comment I would make in response to the person who mentioned haven't seen this dancing before, you know, why aren't more people doing it, or interesting, looks like fun, etc. I call to 7th graders at one school and have been doing it for, I don't know, more than 10 years. And I go in and we run 7 sessions where I build on the moves I teach them. We never do star through or square through, for example. It's all circle choreography. But then we put on a performance for a couple of minutes at May Day, and I want something that looks good in performance. Out of just doing something different, when we were out on the green practicing, I taught them a partner dance where you, a mixer dance, we would call it, which you'll see on YouTube is the All-American Promenade, or a variety of others. It's a pretty simple, it repeats every, I don't know, 16 beats or something, or 32 beats. And it's pretty high energy. It's got some jumping and some walking and walking backwards, etc. And I really enjoy dancing it. And I show it to them. And invariably, if they ever see me again, all they want me to do is do that one dance again. And I think that if I had shown them that dance on the first day that I met them, none of them would do it. None of them would enjoy it. It's because their dance skills have built up enough to enjoy moving with the music, being synchronized, et cetera, et cetera. I understand that people, especially school students first exposed to square dancing, don't always like it. But with the right teacher, the right progression, you can suddenly get them to a point where, whoa, this is actually kind of a lot of fun. And then while they don't know it, there's a whole bunch of other dance forms, be it Contra Dancing, international folk dancing, whatever, that they would also enjoy if they only knew it. So that was a point. A final point, and then I'll shut up for a bit, is modern Western square dancers, especially those in the know, often want to expose other callers or dancers to Contra dancing because they know it's good. At some level, that's the whole point of this talk today. And if you go to the National Square Dance Convention, the Modern Western National Square Dance Convention, there's a Contra Hall. And I think Tony's called in it. And for the 10 or so years that I would bring my daughter to the National Square Dance Convention, I would go, quote, support that hall. But the dancing in it is horrible. And the presenters in it are often horrible. And the music's played too fast. It's recorded music generally. And the well-intentioned callers, fortunately, none of whom are on this call, don't do a good job trying to present and convince people that what they enjoy can also be enjoyable by others and should be spread around a bit. So I'm sorry that if any of you have experienced that, it isn't really the same as going to the videos that Tony showed of the Scout House or the local dances that David Millstone calls at in New Hampshire, et cetera. Every time as a modern Western caller, I travel, for example, to Los Angeles. Usually my dances don't meet on Saturday night. So I and others from the challenge dance weekend that I go to, we all go out to the local Contra dance. And it's not a zesty Contra dance by what we spoke of as zesty, but it's always enjoyable. Beginners are welcome. There are new people there. I try to seek them out and dance with them because I know that they're a little uncertain and scared, and I have a good time. So there's dancing everywhere. And I do still go and enjoy it. Thank you.
Yeah, I would mention that in just about every city of any size across the US and also a lot of college towns, there will be at least a monthly Contra dance with live music and often 2 or more times a month. in the Boston area, in Massachusetts in general, the dancers are spoiled rotten. They'll go visiting elsewhere and they'll say, "What do you mean there's no dance tonight? What do you mean I have to wait till Saturday or Thursday or whatever?" Because around here we have at the peak, maybe 20 years ago, we had literally a contra dance every night of the week within an hour's drive with live music. Now it's more like every other night, but there's still a lot of it. Does anybody else want to talk? Because I have a few anecdotes from the national, but I can, I won't forget them because I've told them so often. So I can hold on to them if people have other comments or questions.
The only thing I was going to pipe in with was just because I'm trying to figure out how I can reinvent my scene here in Petaluma, especially when we come back to actually dancing. Talk to me a little bit about working with actual musicians and how you entice them and all of that process.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we have so many musicians around here that the problem is picking and choosing. If you're in an area where there isn't a living tradition of live music for dancing, I would look at music schools or the music department of general schools. I would if you have a music store that caters to folk music, that sells acoustic instruments. Sometimes they have a bulletin board. Anybody else have ideas? David Millstone, and any thoughts on how to put a band together if you don't have one?
Dan, how far are you away from Nick Kusha? He's in Merced.
He's I'm quite a distance, probably about 150 miles, I think.
Give him a call, because he also he has a foot in the contra dance world too, and he'll be able to put you in touch with musicians.
Okay, cool. And then
that's how you get in touch with musicians.
Or Andy, Andy
networking.
So, can I speak?
Hi. Yeah.
So I'm in this very interesting position. So I'm a new caller for square dancing, but I also am a member of the fiddlers group that meets once a week, and I dance with them. I've just started becoming a guitar player with the band, and we have a monthly dance where I have assisted the regular caller to teach Virginia reels more as the demo person. But the regular caller has just moved out of town, and they're looking for somebody to take their place. So how would I get the information of how to call what? Is there a library base or? Only sure should answer.
Well, I hardly know where to start. There's a lot of stuff online. I've written a textbook on calling contras, which has a big resources section in the back recommending other books and tune books for musicians and recordings with and without calls. I'm in the middle of writing another one for squares. Yeah. Our website is www.hands4, that's HANDS, the numeral 4.com. And this is available now, and the Squares book should be available by the middle of next year. And there are also, I would say that the Country Dance and Song Society, cdss.org, sells a lot of stuff too. They have several books and CDs about dances for young people, everything from pre-kindergarten up through high school. They I would just go and browse the books and recordings there. There's a lot of information out there. David, anything to add?
My pen stopped working and I missed it. Could you put it in the chat, please? The
Oh, Steve Avery just did hands4.com.
No, but you mentioned something
The other,
else.
the other one is CDSS, Country Dance and Song Society.org.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would just add, there are
To Bandy Shore privately.
major
what
collections
we
of
wanted.
dances available online.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
once you start looking, I think you won't have too much trouble finding them.
Yeah,
I just didn't realize didn't realize it was still out, going out there. I was sort of told it was starting to go out, that we're just basically using it for fiddle camps and stuff. So this gives me a whole different perspective.
And Yolanda, I'll be glad to talk with you directly if you want to email me and tell me, you know, what it is more specifically that you're looking for, what kind of group, what age range, and so forth, and what you and they have done in the past and what the other caller did. I'll be glad to give you some tips.
Yeah, things like Virginia reels and stuff.
I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Go ahead, John.
Well, I'm out here in the up in the Pacific Northwest, up on Kitsap Peninsula, just northwest of Tacoma area. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, west of Seattle. We've got a big hall that I don't think is utilized as much as it could be, and we're doing mostly it's just modern Western square dancing. But how would I go finding maybe a Contras thing that might like to come use our hall? I mean, I'm in a strange position. I think I've got a hall that could be more used, and I don't have the Contra dancers.
Well, if
Is there a Contra dancer clearinghouse out in this area?
Does CDSS still have I know we have a directory of members. Do we have a directory of dance series? I haven't looked lately.
There's a list of CDSS affiliates available online, and there are regular dances in Seattle and in Tacoma and up and down the.
Yeah. Oh, and there's Contra Dance Links, Charlie Selig's website, which tries to include all the series around the world. Is that .com or .org?
Is that the CDSS.org or .com?
.org.
.org, CDSS.org. I could lead me to something like that.
Yeah, and the other website. Can you look it up quickly? Yeah, I'm not sure if it's .com or .org, and we're looking it up right now. But it's a third party. You know, it's one guy's website where he tries to list all the dance series that anybody is running, whether or not they're affiliated with CDSS or any other umbrella group.
And Jeff Kaufman has a site called trycontra.com, which has by zip code, and there's a heat map, so you can look at the country and see where Contra dancing generally takes place and zoom around and find dances.
Yeah, if you could put those in the chat, then I can save the chat at the end.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
There is a group in Seattle called the Seattle Subversives.
Oh, that's Squares, isn't it?
But I think they're traditional also.
I think they're traditional squares, because I was going to recommend finding the organizers of Dare to Be Square West, because they do this all up and down the West Coast.
Yeah, and I was going to get into that in our next session, whenever that is. That there is still another network besides the Contra Dance network, and that is it's small but growing now, of old time, mostly Southern squares to mostly Southern music. And we can get into the nuances of the different styles some other time. Yeah, there is, I think, I would say there's still growing interest across the US and maybe Canada in dancing to live music.
I want to throw in that the thought that came to mind when Yolanda was asking about getting into this. Tony's book will give you a good although I've never seen it, I've got to admit. Give you a good basics on the choreography and good dances to do and what have you. But one day I asked Tony many years ago why I enjoyed his dances so much, a little bit more than some of the others. I mean, a lot of it was choreography. Tony has written an awful lot of good dances himself that a lot of traditional people use. But Tony said something about the same kind of a problem or thing we have in Western as to what's good and what's bad. He programs his whole evening. He knows when to throw in a contra, when to throw in a squares. He knows when to add energy, when to slow it down, when to contrast different contras and how to do that. It's the same as other people have in other genres, but that's one of the things that once you get into contras, it'll start refining your performance. I just remember Tony was a master at that too.
Yeah, we're trying to do the same thing that modern Western callers are doing, which is hold people's interest and not run them ragged all night. You know, drop the energy level a little and then goose them a little, and you know, the band does that too with key changes and changes in instrumentation. You know, key of A gets them every time. You want the dancers to scream, just switch into the key of A.
But I'm sure a lot has to do with you telling the band, or you know, choosing the band and working with them and getting to these things that you need.
Well, it's like the old story of the TV repairman who comes and you know, the TV just isn't working, and he comes and goes in the back of the set and turns one little screw, and then you know, gives the homeowner a bill for $50, and the homeowner says, would you mind itemizing that? And so the guy writes out $1 for turning screw, $49 for knowing which screw to turn.
Mm-hmm.
Tony, you said you had a couple of anecdotes. I've got one, but I'm going to save it to the few people that are left after yours.
Yeah, I can empty the hall and nothing flat. Okay, I think it was Clark who talked about being bored with C4. One time at the National, I forget which year it was, we had a full-time contra hall, and then we had a smaller hall that we used half the time for more experienced contra dancing, and the other half of the time the challenge callers had it. So, you know, every so often we would be switching over, and so at the end of one of the challenge time slots, one of our callers got on the mic and said, you know, that ends the challenge session for now, but we invite you challenge dancers to stick around and dance with us. This is C5, we call it Contra.
Did anyone stick around?
I don't remember. And then about one time I was just stretching my legs. Usually we stick pretty much to the contra hall, but I was stretching my legs and looking just out of curiosity into some of the other halls at the National. And so I looked into the challenge hall, and a woman said, you know, we need somebody to fill out a square. Will you come dance with us? And I said, well, you know, I'd love to, but I really don't know all the calls. I'm over from the Contra Hall just watching. And she said, oh, Contra, that looks like so much fun, but I could never do that. That's so hard. This is somebody who knew at least C1 and how many 100 calls and was talking about Contra dancing as hard. I said, well, what do you find hard about it? And she said, you have to think. And I knew just what she meant, that, you know, you have to hear plain English and interpret it on the fly rather than respond automatically to specific words, which brings to mind a couple of incidents that we had in, it was Anaheim 88, I think, when we had a really jumping contra hall, even without live music. We had some good callers and some good choices of material and good choices of music. And we massaged the rules about spectators weren't allowed to dance. you know, anybody who popped their head in, even if they were off the street, we encouraged them to get in and dance. But I remember during a walkthrough, the caller said, do a right and left through, and people did it. And then the caller said, now do a right and left back. And somebody said, in all seriousness, what's a right and left back? We never had that one. Because, you know, it's true that in modern Western, you change one word and you change the meaning of the call. It's like, you know, spin chain through, or spin chain the gears versus spin chain and exchange the gears, or follow your neighbor versus follow your neighbor and spread. So they had to assume, not having heard it before, that a right and left back was different from a right and left through. And I could sympathize. And the one other story was from that same session, I think. There was a contra where you went down the hall 4 in line, then you did either a wheel around or a California twirl, and you came back. And the next calls were bend the line, do a right and left through. And a lot of you probably know that when a contra dance is underway, after a while, when the caller sees that the dancers have it, that they're you know, they've pretty much memorized the routine for the duration, the caller will quit calling. Sometimes they'll leave out a call here and there, and if the dancers can handle it, then they'll quit calling entirely, and the band will take off on the music and do interesting things that would get in the way of the caller, or the caller would get in the way of the band. So it's customary to diminish the calls along the way. So the caller dropped the bend the line and just had down in 4s, turn, come back, and do a right and left through. And somebody said, you can't do that. That's an illegitimate call, right and left through from a line of 4. And they didn't get the idea that, you know, that you're supposed to, you know, after you've done the dance with the bend the line call for 6 or 7 or 8 times through, that the dancers know enough to put the bend the line in without it being called, because the pattern does repeat every 30 seconds. So it's in some ways, you know, it's a different headspace, it's a different mindset, but it's something that people get used to after a while.
Tony, I had that same thing with the right and left back at a party night once. It sort of took me off guard because most of the time people understood it, but somebody was being very literal, and it made me aware that that's something you should do. A couple of anecdotes. One is I forgot to mention in part of Tony's introduction a few hours ago, that the one full contra dance I did that Tony invited me to do, Tony was part of the band. He's a very accomplished piano player and added a good rhythm section to the group, as well as a caller and a choreographer, etc. I also, as a matter of Western calling choreography history, Tony and Clark were talking a little while ago about the singing call, the route, whatever, where the ladies would chain across and then turn and chain down the line, and then across and turn and chain down the line again. Many years ago, from two-face lines, I used to like to call, with the right-hand two-face lines of ladies in the middle, I'd like to call ladies trade and cast off 3/4. And for some reason, I could never get dancers to do that. So I added a hands-on courtesy turn on that cast off 3/4, and I called it chain the line. And after using it once or twice and before really publishing it, I realized that this is nothing but the chain down the line that traditional dancers have been doing forever. And it's just an extension of it from two-face lines and left-hand ocean waves that we're using in Western dancing. So sometimes I'm credited with having created chain down the line, but it was really an extension of the traditional call.
Well,
Anyone?
This is a good place, Don, for me to say that the calls that your name is associated with, the ones I know about, I really admire what you've done in terms of to me, they feel more traditional than some of the newer calls And they have kind of dignified names too, names I wouldn't be ashamed to use, like Ferris wheel. You know, it's an all-American thing associated with people going out and having fun, and the move feels kind of like that. You know, it doesn't literally describe what the move is, but it has something to do with the motion of that particular call, and the same with Grand Tour. It feels like it would fit right into a traditional milieu.
I actually got a kick out of it when you called Grand Tour one time on a Monday, Concord Scout House. That never did pick up or catch on in Western, but there's a good YouTube video of Dick Ledger calling it, and I like to see that every once in a while. I think Daryl has left us already, but I created that, I believe, for Daryl when he wanted a grand square type of call that he could use in singing calls that would end with the dancers across from home instead of at home, so they could do an Alaman left, right and left grand, and then have a full promenade instead of just half promenade like Grand Square. Any other sage, interesting, dumb questions, comments? Oh, Mel, did you put the Dick Ledger link in the chat? That's good. I don't have to do that then.
Yeah, I did, and David Millstone also put one in that's on the square dance history.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you haven't already, you know, everybody take note of the Square Dance History Project website, which has come up a couple of times. This is David Millstone's creation, and I'm one of the so-called core consultants, which just means that he asks me questions about New England style occasionally. What it is a virtual museum. It's a website with links to, I think it's about 2,000 items now. About, last I looked, about half of them were video clips, and then there are audio clips. There are scans of Square Dance publications, magazine articles, newsletters. There are articles from mainstream newspapers, you know, the non-Square Dance media, newspaper and magazine articles, photos, and so forth. Anything to do with both traditional and modern Western, and it's fascinating to just browse there, and every time I go, I see something I didn't know about.
By the way, David, thank you very much for all the work you have and are putting into that. As somebody said earlier, I've gotten lost in that. Good idea, Dan. I've gotten lost in that rabbit hole several times. It's a great place to explore and kill time if you're interested in our great hobbies, sports, businesses.
And I'll just add that one of the things about that site from the get-go has been my core consultants, Tony's one of them, Jim Mayo is another. From the beginning, the goal was to present all aspects of squares. And there's not many places, this session today is one where modern and traditional can come together and sort of share. And the idea there, I mean, Contra dancers and some traditional square dancers will look down their noses at modern Western. Oh, they wear these funny costumes and they're so regimented. And modern dancers will often look at traditional and say, oh, they wear these t-shirts. They don't even have enough decency to get dressed up for the dance. And we all share so much in common. And there's so many other problems in the world that I'd love it if we could just stop fighting with each other and just recognize, I mean, Contra dancers who are always want more challenge, more challenge, more challenge. And I'll tell them, if you want more challenge, you ought to look at modern square dancing. You'll find plenty of challenge there if that's what you want. And there's room for all of us. And so this site is one effort to try to make people aware of the rich history that we all share. So I'll shut up. It's been really fun being here with you all today.
David, thanks again for what you've done on the site. Maybe we should talk about you having a session for us presenting the different aspects of it.
I'd love to have some of that.
I shouldn't have that on open mic. I should talk to you privately, but it's too late.
I'd also note that that one of the conversations I've had with several different people coming up to this presentation was all of there's been all of these attempts to do trimmed down versions of modern Western square dancing. And for those of us who are really new to the whole thing, yeah, going back and reading even the books from the 50s and finding all of the same complaints that us newbies have is, thank you, David and Tony, for keeping this alive so that we can go back and hopefully not recreate the same mistakes.
I have a question for Tony. I noticed that the swing move is very, very popular with contra dancing. It seems like every choreography is going to include a swing. So what's the reason for that?
Okay, we just find that it I don't know, it's for a lot of contra dancers, it's the main course, it's the meat and potatoes of contra dancing. It's physically and emotionally, it's the most satisfying of the moves. If you go back in history, the long buzz step swing is a prominent feature of traditional New England dancing. We may have gotten it from the French Canadians who moved here from Quebec to look for work back in, I would say, 100 or more years ago. And it's also a feature of a lot of European folk dances. So it may have come to this country in the mid to late 1800s with all the immigration. But it's just something that has stuck through the years. That when this contra revival started in the mid 1960s, it was traditional. Not every contra dance, but a lot of contra dances had swings as part of the choreography, and the swing has always been longer in the Northeast than in other parts of the continent. In traditional Southern and traditional Western, the swing was 4 to 8 beats of music. In New England, an 8-beat swing was always considered short. You know, it's 8 to 16, and in Quebec, it's 16 or more, sometimes even 32. In fact, in some places, the ladies' chain was ladies give right hands, pull by, and swing the opposite until they got tired, and then chain back to their partners. It's part of it is a historical accident, and part of it is that we find it peculiarly satisfying.
Tom, I want to add to that. I mentioned earlier that I find Western more mentally challenging and traditional more physically and emotionally challenging. The swing is one of the physically not challenging, enjoyable parts. I'm not sure challenging was the right comment. It's once you learn how to swing, and it took some contra dancers teaching me how to swing. Once you learn how, it's a very rewarding, good feeling, and you get upset when it gets cut short. But the one thing that we haven't mentioned yet is the emotional part. One of the things, at least when I was contra dancing, and I assume it's the same thing going on now, Tony, is that one of the quirks of contra dancing is eye contact, is looking people in the eye and flirting with them. And swinging gives you a good long chance to flirt with all these strangers. it takes some getting used to. It took me quite a while because I took it personally. And I remember between marriages, one woman I was dating said, boy, the first contra dance I went to, this guy was really flirting and really good eye contact, and I got all excited. And then at the end of the dance, he walked out and didn't even say goodbye, because the flirting is that's what you do in the eye contact when you're swinging people. It's very emotionally satisfying and catchy, and the physical and the emotional with it, especially on the swings, is definitely a good part. It also makes it easier for the caller because it clears up the timing. That, you know, you want to start the next thing on the next phrase, and they just swing as long as necessary till the next phrase of music goes ahead and has them starting.
Interesting.
Yeah,
when
when I have called
If you
to
look at
modern
the-
Western dancers, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead, Don.
The biggest challenge for me in calling contras or New England squares to modern Western dancers, as I've done at several nationals, is to get them to use up the music. You know, if I call a swing, they'll swing once around and then they'll stand there for 4 beats until I give the next call. Or if I call a lady's chain, they'll do it in 5 steps and then stand still for 3. And so the biggest hurdle is not they're learning new basics because we're only using about 20 of their basics. The hurdle is telling them that, you know, this is different. This is, I call it square dance basics with round dance timing. And they usually understand when I say that, you know, that they are dancing to the music in a way that they don't usually.
One of the things that I noticed in the contra dancing is when you are prompting, you call a swing. If it's 8 beats to the next start of the phrase, they'll swing to that 8. If it's, you know, 12 beats, they'll swing for the 12. You don't have to tell them to 2 or 3 times around. They fill in for the phrase of the music because they're trained, well, conditioned, I guess would be a better word, to actually dance to the music.
It's
The
the
other,
training.
the other interesting thing I saw was if you look at contra dancing, like if you look up square dancing on the net, or you look up a movement on square dancing like a swing, you'll find about 6 walkthrough training instructional videos. You look at the swing on contra dancing, you're going to find about 40 different training sessions on how to do 40 different types of swings for contra, either a double hand Allemande swing, a swing with a flourish, and they're that dedicated to doing that, but every single one of them is working to the beat of the music.
A personal complaint about some Western dancers, and maybe the Western callers can talk to their newer dancers about it. The first part's not a complaint. Some people just physically can't swing and will even have a badge saying, "Don't swing me" or something, or they just don't like to. And that's fine. But those people, I've so often seen, they don't swing, they just start on a singing call, they don't swing, they just start promenading and crash into all the people in front of them that are actually swinging like they were told to. So if you're not going to swing, just be aware that others are and wait a moment, mentally swing or something. Just my personal little gripe. Clark?
I think it's interesting to look at 2 things that are done in both modern Western and traditional squares and contra, and how different they are, and how we've kind of made them insipid in modern Western. And that would be balance. We saw in one of the contra dance videos tons of balances. The dance had balances all over the place. And when you're dancing it, it's energetic, it's fun, it synchronizes the hall with the music, and it feels good. And yet our balances in modern Western are generally thrown in as an afterthought and pretty insipid. And then the other one is what we've just been talking about, swing. We normally go around for 4 or 6 beats of music. Once a round is enough, if you even do that. And then in contra dancing, most of the dances have well, both a partner swing and a neighbor swing every 64 beats, usually one shorter than the other. Some of them only have partner swings. But swinging is good, is fun, but it takes a lot of training and skill, or experience and skill, to be good at swinging. And even at Tech, we try to spend a lot of time on teaching swing to new dancers, because there's so many people who know what it can be, either through their Contra dance experience or even modern Western. But if the swings are always short, you never get good at it.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a chicken and egg problem there. But and another thing that we've adopted into modern Western is the connected moves, like dive through, California twirl. And yet, when we do dive throughs for no good reason, and we didn't have a connected move in front of it, like circle half, center's arch, and dive through, it doesn't feel as good as when it's built into certain pattern dances. And yet we still have dive through on the list, and we have pass the center. And now people just go, why don't I just call pass the center? And they don't understand how good moves like dive through and California twirl can feel if it's connected with what comes before and after it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one thing we haven't talked about is connection, physical connection. There's a phenomenon which I think was first articulated by teachers of English country dance, which is one of the ancestors of Contra dance. It's called giving weight, or sometimes sharing weight or matching weight. And that is a kind of a spring in the arms, a kind of a resistance. I don't want to call it tension, but just the fact that you need to let the other person know that you're alive and well. And it's particularly important in swinging, but it's also important in the hand turn. And of course, we do the pigeon wing hands up hold rather than the forearm hold when we do Alaman left and hand turns in general. It's also important in things like circle left and forward and back, that your hands are, you know, about chest high to the shorter person, and your elbows are pointing down toward the floor, and there is, you pull gently and you match your pull against the other person's pull, rather than just letting them flop, letting your arms flop. And I, anytime I'm doing a teaching session, like 20 minutes before a Contra dance evening, I don't try to teach as many basics, as many calls as possible. I focus on giving weight and the three moves that depend on giving weight, that you can't tell from the sidelines what they feel like. You can't tell just by watching somebody do them. And that is the hand turn, the balance, and the swing, because the rest of it they can pick up during the walkthroughs. I don't bother with chains or right and left through or whatever. I focus on giving weight and how dancing should feel.
Giving weight is sort of I like to describe as a counterbalance that helps. I mean, I think it's a more English-like term that it helps explain it to non-dancers. One thing I mentioned earlier was that when I first started Contra dancing, I asked about the styling. How do you hold your hands for this or for that? And people said, any way you want, it doesn't matter. But I noticed that everybody does seem to follow certain unwritten rules. As Tony just said, we hold our hands up on the Alaman left arm turns. And by the way, Tony, the forearm thing is mostly a New England thing. A lot of the rest of the country does forearm turn, hands up kind of thing. Pros and cons of an argument we're not going to get into.
Yeah, I always thought it was strange that in a region, New England, where hands up was traditional, that was the one place where modern Western dancers used a forearm for things like Alamo.
There were a lot of big discussions about that at Color Lab, and the majority of the country said arms up, and I think it was written that way, and New England never changed, and finally they wrote in or regional differences, but something like that. Clark, was that a hands up or you were just stretching?
I was trying to avoid the sun that keeps moving across. That's
Oh.
why I'm kind of over here. I will say that in Tony's squares, when he's calling, he's using what I think of as square dance pattern, kind of talking or saying something almost all the time throughout the music, rhyming, rhyming words, et cetera. And I think that's a skill that's been lost in a lot of modern Western callers. Jim Mayo has it. Tony certainly does it. But we don't hear a lot of that from other people. Vic Cedar has picked up a little bit of it and throws it in every once in a while, more as humor than as a way of calling. Why do you do that, Tony?
I think there are several reasons why that died out by and large. One is that there are so many calls, even at mainstream, there are 70 to 100 calls depending on how you define a call. And of course, it only goes up from there. And that because the dancers have been trained to respond by rote to specific words, and because they literally don't know what's coming, that's Jim Mayo says that's the distinguishing feature between traditional and modern square dancing, is that the caller doesn't let the dancers know what's coming, and doesn't repeat patterns. Whether the caller is using modules or sight or mental image or whatever, the dancers don't know what's coming next. And so patter would be noise. It would be noise when what the dancers need is signal. It would get in the way of their interpreting the calls on the fly. I think that's the main reason I think that we lost patter. It was cultivated to a fine art in the 50s. And this is to everybody now, if you want to hear masterful use of patter, it's part of the Internet Archive. It's archive.org, but all you have to do is do a Google search for square dance live recordings, and you'll get a repository of about 300 field recordings averaging about an hour from actual dances of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and look for Bruce Johnson. And he was able to call in continuous rhyming couplets and put the key word, the command, at any point in those 4-beat lines. If it was swing or allemande or chain or whatever, what have you, he could put it on the first or the second or the third or the fourth beat of that little 4-beat phrase, and get it out just when the dancers needed it, but continue to speak in rhyming couplets all the way through. And so he's one of my role models. Ed Gilmore too was good at that. And the reason I do it is because it's fun. I enjoy it because to some extent it's an ego trip, but also I like the fact that I'm keeping a folk art alive. I find it very satisfying to sound as though I'm patter calling when I'm actually prompting. Dick Ledger was also good at that. He's another one of my heroes because he used modern music, and he called within the modern Western network as opposed to the traditional, the Contras and Traditional Squares network. But what he was using was really well-timed stuff. He could call a New England square with the best of them. He just did it to modern music, and wrote a lot of good singing calls too that used really good New England timing.
Tony, I've been amazed when I call party nights, how quickly the dancers, or how quickly I train the dancers to distinguish between the signal and the noise. I use a lot of rhyming fill-in patter wherever I can, but even new people seem to be able to pick out what they're supposed to respond to and what's just part of the music. One of my complaints I've been saying lately is of all this modern music people are using. They're not using the music. They're for patter anyway, in Western. They're not using the music, it's just fighting them in the background. And I wish more people would go along with what you were saying on that.
Yeah, we've always valued good music and good sound when we can get it. We don't use Hilton equipment because Hilton equipment is specifically engineered to emphasize the high mid-range in the caller's voice and to de-emphasize the highs in the music. And so we start we use a non-square dance amplifier, and we will start with flat tone controls, and then we will tweak them for each number. But we do it to keep the music as loud as possible without interfering with the caller's voice. Those clips that I played earlier, the dancers in the hall would have heard the calls better than you heard them on the clips, because of the way the clips were recorded. But we do make sure that the caller can be heard and understood.
Thank
Don,
you.
you're muted.
I noticed. Dan, you were going to talk?
Oh, I was just going to toss out a thank you for, there are a couple of ideas and things that I picked up here about how to use fillers and things. This has been a good eye-opener for a session. Over to you, Don.
I was just going to say that dead silence pause sort of indicates that maybe we've come to a good ending point of this session. I'm really pleased the way it went. I really thank you, Tony, for right on spot to what I had in mind to introduce Western people to the wonderful world, the parallel world. How did I say parallel universe?
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward, and hopefully the people that came are looking forward to maybe the end of January when we have you come back and give us a history of squares. I think you did that at that weekend you were at, and was it in California? And I heard some of that on YouTube. There's a good video of you going through a lot of stuff. There you had the opportunity of having live dancers to demonstrate some of the stuff. Unfortunately, I don't think we can do that. But maybe you've got some videos from that even to include.
Yep. Definitely.
I guess we'll call it 2¼ hours as usual. As I said, conversation goes well. For those of you that haven't joined us before, we're here most Saturdays, not the next two, but please come again. Tony, thanks an awful lot. Oh, go ahead.
There's a note from Paul in the chat. How can you save the chat for these sessions? Because there are a lot of links there that people would want to take advantage of.
So if right now
David
you
got
go, there's a little 3 dots
On the
over
lower
by the right, on the lower right, and one of the options is save chat, and that should save it in your downloads folder. The other thing is that I get all of the public messages, and I noticed some things have been in the private back and forth with me. I might have to copy some of those out. I try to copy those and put them in the YouTube comments when I post the YouTube link. So you should be able to get them both ways, and grab them now because they'll go away as soon as I close the window.
I am not capable of multitasking in that respect, so I don't read chats while they're going on. I used to copy and paste regularly and have all sorts of overlap, but if you use those 3 dots in the low, click on the chat thing below, it opens the window, click on those 3 dots and put record chat. And what it does, it just adds the new stuff to the end of it. So you just have a single file of all the chat stuff when you get around to looking at it. And I generally trim off the times and the word from on each of them and just have the thing read to me by my computer of all the way through. There's always some good stuff there. Did somebody else have a hand up? I'm not sure. I guess not.
I think we've kind of hit it. Thank you once again for coming, and save your chats now. You've got about 15 seconds, and I'll close this meeting.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good holidays.
Thank you, Don. Thanks
you.
everybody for coming.
All the best, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.